If loving someone honestly makes me cheap, then maybe the problem isn't me. The words hadn't even finished echoing when the room went silent. The kind of silence that feels heavier than noise, pressing against your chest, making every breath harder to take. Just seconds earlier, the ballroom had been alive with laughter, champagne glasses clinking under warm golden lights, the kind of place where every smile looked expensive and every conversation felt calculated. Sophia Bennett stood at the center of it all, her hands trembling just slightly at her sides, her reflection flickering in the polished marble floor beneath her heels. Heels she had almost not worn because one of them had been repaired with a careful line of glue the night before. She didn't belong here, not really, and she had known it the moment she stepped through those towering glass doors, but she had convinced herself tonight would be different, that love, real love, could bridge anything. Across from her, Daniel Whitmore adjusted his cufflinks with a calm that felt almost rehearsed, his tailored suit flawless, his expression composed in a way that made what came next feel even colder. "Let's be honest," he said into the microphone, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room, smooth and precise like a practiced speech. "I think everyone here deserves to know the truth." A few people chuckled nervously, thinking it was part of the evening's entertainment, some kind of toast gone slightly off script. Sophia's heart began to pound louder, drowning out the music, the chatter, everything except the sharp awareness that something was about to break. "I thought she loved me," Daniel continued, glancing at her only briefly, as if she were already fading from importance. "But it turns out she was just another girl looking for a way up." The words landed harder than any shout could have, slicing through the room with a quiet cruelty that made people shift uncomfortably, though not enough to stop watching. Phones lifted subtly, screens glowing like silent witnesses, capturing every second. Sophia felt the heat rise to her face, her throat tightening, her instinct screaming at her to run, to disappear before the humiliation could settle in completely, but her feet refused to move. Instead, she stood there, holding on to the only thing she had left, her dignity, fragile, but still hers. "Go ahead," Daniel added, a faint smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. As he lowered the mic slightly, "Tell them I'm wrong." And for a moment, Sophia almost did nothing, almost let the silence swallow her whole. But then something shifted. Maybe it was the memory of every extra shift she had worked, every bill she had paid on her own, every quiet sacrifice no one in this room would ever understand. She lifted her chin, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "If loving someone honestly makes me cheap," she said, each word landing clearer now, stronger, "then I'd rather be poor." A ripple moved through the crowd, subtle but undeniable, like a crack forming beneath a perfect surface. And somewhere near the back of the room, unnoticed until that exact moment, a man who had been watching quietly finally stepped forward, his eyes fixed not on the crowd, not on the spectacle, but on her. The man did not rush, and that was the first thing people noticed. In a room where everything moved fast, where judgments were made in seconds and loyalties shifted even faster, his calm presence cut through the tension like a quiet certainty. He stepped forward from the shadows near the back, his shoes barely making a sound against the polished floor, his expression unreadable but steady, as if he had already decided what mattered long before this moment began. Sophia did not see him at first. Her focus was still locked on Daniel, on the echo of his words, on the way the crowd hovered somewhere between discomfort and curiosity. But then she felt it, not a touch yet, but a shift in the air beside her, a presence that did not feel like judgment. When she finally turned, her breath caught for just a second. He was not dressed like the others. No flashy watch, no overly tailored suit, just a simple dark jacket that fit him well enough to suggest quiet confidence rather than display. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, everything else in the room seemed to fade. Not disappear, but dim, like background noise losing its grip. Without asking, without hesitation, he reached out his hand. The gesture was simple, almost understated, but in that room, under those lights, it carried weight. Sophia hesitated, not because she did not want to take it, but because she did not understand it. No one had stepped forward for her before. No one had interrupted a moment like this, especially not in a room full of people who measured worth by status and advantage. "Come on," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear it, yet somehow steady enough to anchor her. You do not have to stand here alone. There was no pity in his tone, no performance, no attempt to impress the crowd. Just certainty. Behind them, a few whispers began to ripple, subtle at first, then growing as more people noticed what was happening. Daniel let out a short, disbelieving laugh, lifting the microphone again as if he could regain control of the narrative. "And you are?" he asked, his voice sharper now, edged with irritation. The man did not even look at him right away. His attention remained on Sophia, his hand still extended, patient, unwavering. It was not a command. It was a choice. And for the first time that night, Sophia felt like she had won. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, steady, grounding in a way that surprised her. Not possessive, not forceful, just present. The moment their hands met, something shifted again, this time more visibly. The room leaned in. Daniel scoffed, lowering the microphone slightly. "You think this changes anything?" he said, his voice louder now, trying to reclaim the attention slipping through his fingers. That was when the man finally turned to him. His expression did not harden, did not rise to meet the challenge. If anything, it became even calmer, and somehow that made it more powerful. "It already has," he replied simply. No raised voice, no dramatic pause, just a statement that landed with quiet precision. A few people in the crowd exchanged glances, their earlier amusement fading into something closer to curiosity, even unease. The balance had shifted, and everyone could feel it, even if they could not explain why. The man gave Sophia's hand a gentle, reassuring squeeze before guiding her one step away from the center of the room. Not pulling her, not leading her like an accessory, but moving with her, as if they were equals in a decision made together. And as they took that step, Sophia realized something she had not expected. For the first time since she walked into that ballroom, she was no longer trying to prove she belonged. She was simply choosing to leave. The doors of the ballroom closed behind them with a soft, muted thud, sealing off the noise, the whispers, the judgment that still lingered inside, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The hallway outside felt almost too quiet, the kind of quiet that made every small sound noticeable, the faint hum of overhead lights, the distant echo of footsteps somewhere far away, the subtle rhythm of Sophia's own breathing as she tried to steady herself. She pulled her hand back gently, not abruptly, but with a hesitation that revealed she was still catching up to everything that had just happened. "You did not have to do that," she said, her voice softer now, stripped of the strength she had forced herself to hold moments ago. The man looked at her, not surprised by the distance she created, not offended by it either. "I know," he replied simply. That answer lingered between them, unexpected in its honesty. Sophia let out a small breath, almost a quiet laugh, though there was no humor in it, just disbelief. "Most people would have stayed seated," she added, glancing back toward the closed doors as if she could still feel the weight of all those eyes. "Most people did," he said, his tone calm, not judgmental, just factual. She studied him more closely now, really looking for the first time. There was something about him that did not match the room they had just left. Not out of place, but untouched by it, like he did not need it to define him. "Who are you?" she asked, the question coming out more direct than she intended. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second, not long enough to seem suspicious, but just enough to suggest he chose his words carefully. "Someone who does not think you deserve that," he said. It was not an answer, not really, but it was not a deflection either. It was something else, something that shifted the focus back to her without dismissing the question entirely. Sophia crossed her arms lightly, more to ground herself than to create distance. "That is not a name," she said, though there was no sharpness in her voice, only a quiet curiosity now. He gave a faint smile, the kind that did not try to charm, just acknowledged the truth. "Ethan," he said after a moment. "Ethan Cole." The name did not mean anything to her, and somehow that made her feel more at ease. No recognition, no expectation, no immediate imbalance. Just a stranger who had stepped in when no one else did. "Sophia," she replied, though he already knew. The silence returned, but this time it felt different, less heavy, more open, like something was waiting to unfold rather than something that needed to be escaped. From inside the ballroom, a faint swell of music began again, as if the night had already decided to move on without them. Sophia shook her head slightly, almost in disbelief. I thought tonight was going to change everything, she admitted, more to herself than to him. It did, Ethan said quietly. She looked at him, a hint of skepticism crossing her face. That is not exactly how I imagined it. It rarely is, he replied. There was no attempt to fix it, no empty reassurance, just a calm acceptance that somehow made it easier to breathe. Sophia glanced down at her hands, noticing the faint line of glue along her shoe again, the small imperfection she had tried so hard to hide earlier. It seemed almost insignificant now. So what happens next? She asked, the question carrying more than just curiosity, but uncertainty, possibility, and a quiet hope she was not ready to admit. Ethan did not answer right away. Instead, he looked down the long hallway ahead, then back at her, as if measuring something that did not need to be rushed. That depends, he said, his voice steady, on whether you want to go back in there, or walk away from it completely. Sophia followed his gaze, then slowly shook her head, a small but certain movement. I think I have had enough of that room, she said. Ethan nodded once, as if that was all he needed to hear. Then let us not go back, he said. And without making it dramatic, without turning it into something larger than it was, he turned and started walking toward the exit at the end of the hall, not checking if she would follow, just trusting that she would. Sophia stood still for a second, watching him, feeling the pull of two different worlds behind and ahead of her, and then, with a quiet breath, she chose to move forward. The night air hit her the moment the glass doors opened, cool and sharp against her skin, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the faint scent of rain that had not quite fallen yet. And for the first time that evening, Sophia felt like she could breathe without something pressing down on her chest. The city stretched out in front of them, glowing in soft amber lights, cars moving like steady streams beneath the dark sky, a world that did not care about what had just happened inside that ballroom. Ethan slowed his steps once they reached the sidewalk, giving her space without making it obvious, his hands now tucked casually into his jacket pockets, as if nothing about the night required urgency. Sophia wrapped her arms around herself, not because she was cold, but because she was trying to hold on to something steady inside. I do not even know where I am going, she admitted after a moment, her voice quieter now, almost lost in the open space around them. Ethan glanced at her, not surprised, just attentive. Home would be a good start, he said. She let out a small breath, shaking her head slightly. I lost that tonight too, she replied. It was not dramatic, not exaggerated, just a simple truth. The job, the relationship, the illusion of stability she had built around both of them, all of it had unraveled in less than 10 minutes. Ethan studied her for a second, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with a kind of quiet understanding that made it feel safe to be honest. Then we figure out the next step, he said. No promises, no grand solutions, just something practical, something real. A car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminating the faint scuff on her heel, the small imperfection she had tried so hard to hide earlier, and for some reason, that detail made everything feel more real. She glanced down at it, almost self-conscious, then looked back up. You talk like this is simple, she said. It is not simple, Ethan replied. But it is not impossible either. There was something in the way he said it that made her pause, not because it solved anything, but because it made the weight feel lighter, even if just slightly. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been building since they left the room. Why did you do it? Ethan did not answer right away. He looked out at the street, watching the steady movement of the city as if the answer was somewhere in that rhythm. Because no one else did, he said finally. It sounded almost too simple, but there was something beneath it, something unspoken that carried more weight than the words themselves. Sophia searched his face, trying to understand him, trying to find the edges of whatever this was, but he did not offer more than that. And strangely, she did not push. A quiet settled between them again, but it was no longer heavy. It was reflective, like both of them were standing at the edge of something neither had planned for. In the distance, a taxi slowed near the curb, its light glowing faintly as it waited for someone to signal. Ethan nodded toward it. Do you want me to call you a ride? He asked. Sophia followed his gaze, then looked back at him, a small hesitation in her eyes. Accepting help had never been easy for her. It always came with conditions, expectations, things she could not afford to owe. I can manage, she said at first, the words automatic, practiced. Ethan did not argue, did not insist. He simply gave a small nod, respecting the answer exactly as she gave it. And that was what made her pause. No pressure, no hidden agenda, just a choice. She looked at the taxi again, then back at him, her voice softer now. But maybe not alone tonight. Ethan met her gaze, and for the first time since they stepped outside, there was the faintest shift in his expression, not surprise, not triumph, just a quiet acknowledgement of trust. Then you are not alone, he said. And this time, when they moved toward the waiting car, it did not feel like escape. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them had expected. The taxi ride was quiet, but not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that allowed thoughts to settle instead of spiral, as the city lights blurred past the window in soft streaks of gold and white, reflecting faintly in the glass beside Sophia's face. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her fingers still slightly tense, as if they had not fully realized yet that the worst of the night was behind her. Across from her, Ethan leaned back just enough to give her space, his gaze occasionally drifting to the passing streets, but returning to her in brief, thoughtful glances, never intrusive, never demanding. The driver asked for an address, his voice casual, unaware of the weight carried inside the back seat. Sophia hesitated, her mind running through places that no longer felt like options, the apartment she could not afford anymore, the office she would never return to, the version of her life that had just been erased in a single evening. Downtown is fine, she said finally, her voice steady but vague, as if naming a place without naming a destination. The driver nodded and pulled back into traffic. Ethan did not question it. He simply accepted the answer the same way he had accepted everything else she had given him, without pushing for more. Minutes passed, the steady hum of the engine filling the space between them, until Sophia exhaled slowly and leaned her head back against the seat. I should probably thank you, she said, her tone softer now, more grounded. Ethan turned slightly toward her. You do not owe me anything, he replied. She gave a small, almost tired smile. That is new, she said quietly. Most help comes with a price. He held her gaze for a moment, his expression calm, almost reflective. Then maybe it is time you experience something different. The words were simple, but they stayed with her, settling somewhere deeper than she expected. The taxi slowed as they reached a quieter part of the city, where the buildings were lower, the lights softer, the pace less relentless. Sophia glanced out the window, taking in the unfamiliar streets, and for the first time that night, she did not feel lost, just in between. The car came to a stop near a small row of late-night cafes and closed storefronts, the kind of place where people passed through more than they stayed. The driver turned slightly, waiting. Sophia reached for her bag, then paused when Ethan handed over a few bills before she could speak. You did not have to do that, she said, a hint of resistance returning, not out of pride, but out of habit. Ethan met her eyes with the same steady calm. I know, he said again. And just like before, the answer did not feel dismissive. It felt intentional. She hesitated, then gave a small nod, accepting it. This time without argument. The driver thanked them, and the moment the door opened, the cool night air returned, quieter here, almost peaceful compared to the chaos they had left behind. Sophia stepped out first, her heels touching the pavement with a soft click, the repaired sole holding steady despite everything. Ethan followed, closing the door gently behind him. For a second, they stood there under the soft glow of a streetlight, neither of them moving, as if both were waiting for the other to define what came next. Sophia looked around, then back at him, her voice quieter now, but clearer than before. I still do not know what tomorrow looks like, she admitted. Ethan nodded slightly, as if that uncertainty did not need to be solved all at once. Then we start with tonight, he said. She studied him for a moment, searching for something hidden, some sign that this would shift into something complicated, something conditional, but there was nothing there except the same quiet steadiness. And slowly, almost without realizing it, she felt the tension in her shoulders ease. Okay, she said softly. Not a commitment, not a decision for the future, just an agreement for now. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, that was enough. The cafe was still open, its warm yellow lights spilling softly onto the sidewalk as they stepped inside, a quiet contrast to the sharp edges of the night they had just left behind. The bell above the door chimed gently, and for a moment, it felt like crossing into a different world, one where nothing had happened, where no one knew her name or the version of her that had been torn apart under chandeliers and cameras. Sophia paused just inside, taking in the simple space, the hum of a coffee machine, the low murmur of a couple seated near the window, the comforting scent of roasted beans and something sweet in the air. It grounded her in a way she had not expected. Ethan moved beside her without rushing, his presence steady but unobtrusive, as if he understood that this moment was not about leading, but about allowing her to settle. "You can sit anywhere," he said quietly, nodding toward the empty tables. Sophia chose a small table near the corner, away from the window, away from the street, somewhere she could breathe without feeling seen. She slipped into the chair, her posture relaxing just slightly as she placed her hands on the table, fingertips brushing against the smooth wood surface as if confirming it was real. Ethan stepped to the counter, ordering without asking her first, but when he returned, he set down a cup of hot tea in front of her, not coffee, not something sharp, just something warm. "I guessed," he said simply. Sophia looked at the cup, then up at him, surprised. "You guessed right," she admitted softly. He took a seat across from her, leaving enough space between them to keep things easy, unforced. For a while, neither of them spoke. Sophia wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into her fingers, her shoulders lowering inch by inch as the tension of the night slowly unraveled. "It is strange," she said after a moment, her voice quieter now, reflective. "A few hours ago, I thought my life was finally becoming something stable." She let out a small breath, her gaze drifting to the surface of the tea. "And now, it feels like everything disappeared." Ethan listened without interrupting, his attention steady, not trying to fix her words or redirect them. "Sometimes things do not disappear," he said after a pause. "They just stop pretending to be something they were not." Sophia looked up at him, the words settling in deeper than she expected. "That does not make it easier," she replied. "No," he agreed, "but it makes it clearer." The honesty in his voice was disarming, not harsh, not comforting in the usual way, but real. And for the first time, Sophia realized that maybe clarity was not something to fear. She took a small sip of her tea, the warmth spreading through her, steadying her thoughts. "You talk like you have been through this before," she said, studying him more closely now. Ethan leaned back slightly, considering her words. "Not exactly the same," he admitted. "But I know what it feels like when something you trusted turns out to be something else." There was a brief pause, as if there was more behind that sentence, something he chose not to say yet. Sophia noticed it, but she did not press. Instead, she nodded slowly, understanding that some truths take time. The cafe door opened again, the bell chiming softly, and for a second, Sophia's shoulders tensed. Out of instinct, but when she glanced over and saw it was just another late-night customer, the tension eased just as quickly. She let out a quiet breath, almost a release. "I thought I was strong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper now. "Standing there tonight, I realized how quickly everything can break." Ethan met her gaze, his expression calm but certain. "You did not break," he said. "You stood there and told the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent." Sophia held his gaze for a moment, something shifting quietly inside her, something small but steady, like the first step of rebuilding. She looked down at her cup again, then back up, her voice a little stronger this time. "Maybe," she said, and for the first time since the night began, she almost believed it. The quiet of the cafe wrapped around them like a soft barrier from the rest of the world, and for a while, it felt like nothing could reach them there, not the whispers, not the judgment, not the version of the night that had already begun spreading beyond those ballroom walls. Sophia took another sip of her tea, slower this time, her fingers no longer trembling, her breathing steady enough that she could finally hear her own thoughts clearly again. But clarity came with something else too, something she had been avoiding since she stepped out of that room. Consequences. Her phone, still sitting in her bag, suddenly felt heavier than it should have, like it was holding more than just missed calls or messages. She hesitated, then reached for it, pulling it out slowly, almost as if she already knew what she would find. The screen lit up instantly, notifications flooding across it in rapid succession, messages, missed calls, social media alerts, each one stacking on top of the other until the screen was almost unreadable. Her breath caught, not because she was surprised, but because it made everything real in a way she could not ignore anymore. Ethan noticed the shift immediately, the way her shoulders tightened again, the way her gaze fixed on the screen as if she could not look away. "You do not have to open it right now," he said quietly. Sophia shook her head slightly, her thumb hovering over the screen. "I think I already have," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. One notification stood out more than the others, a video clip already gaining traction, the title bold and unforgiving. She did not need to watch it to know what it showed. She had lived it. Still, her thumb moved before she could stop herself, tapping the screen, and suddenly the moment replayed in front of her, her own voice, her own words, the look on Daniel's face, the reaction of the crowd. But something was different this time. The comments scrolling beneath were not what she expected. They were not mocking, not cruel, not the judgment she had braced herself for. They were supportive. She handled that with more grace than anyone else in that room. He embarrassed himself, not her. Whoever she is, she deserves better. Sophia blinked, scrolling slowly, her expression shifting from tension to confusion, then to something softer, something she had not anticipated. "I thought," she started, but the words did not finish. Ethan leaned forward slightly, not to look at the screen, but to meet her eyes. "You thought they would see you the way he tried to paint you," he said. It was not a question. She nodded faintly. "That is how it usually works," she admitted. Ethan gave a small, almost thoughtful nod. "Sometimes people recognize the truth when they see it," he said. Sophia looked back at her phone, her grip loosening just a little. The same moment that had felt like the worst of her life was now being seen in a completely different light, not as a failure, but as something strong. She set the phone down on the table, her hands resting beside it, quieter now. "It still feels like everything fell apart," she said. Ethan did not disagree. "Maybe it did," he said. "But not everything that falls apart is meant to stay broken." The words lingered, settling into the space between them, not forcing her to accept them, just offering a different way to see what had happened. Sophia glanced at him again, her gaze more steady now, more searching. "You always talk like this?" she asked, a hint of curiosity returning. Ethan let out a quiet breath, almost a small laugh. "Only when it matters," he replied. She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded slightly, as if she was beginning to understand that there was more to him than he was saying, more beneath the calm surface he carried so easily. Outside, the streetlights flickered softly, and inside the cafe, the world remained simple, steady, unchanged. But something inside Sophia had shifted again, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to feel the difference. Enough to realize that maybe this night was not just the end of something. Maybe it was the beginning of something she had not seen coming at all. The cafe had grown quieter as the night deepened, the soft murmur of voices fading into the background until it was just the low hum of the espresso machine and the occasional clink of a cup against a saucer. And in that stillness, Sophia found herself sitting a little straighter, her thoughts no longer scattered but slowly aligning into something clearer. She glanced at her phone again, not with dread this time, but with a cautious curiosity, as if she was seeing it for the first time instead of bracing for what it might show. The video was still there, still spreading, but the narrative had shifted in a way she could not ignore. It was no longer just about what had happened to her, but about how she had responded. And somehow, that difference mattered more than she expected. "It is strange," she said quietly, her eyes still on the screen. "I thought that moment would define me in the worst way." Ethan watched her carefully, not interrupting, allowing her to find her own words. "But it is doing the opposite," she continued, her voice softer but steadier now. "It is like people saw something I did not even know I had." Ethan nodded slightly, as if that realization was not surprising to him. "Sometimes it takes the worst moment to show who you really are," he said. Sophia looked up at him, studying his face again, trying to understand how someone could speak with such certainty without sounding distant or detached. "You keep saying things like that," she said. "Like you already knew how this would turn out." Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression thoughtful, as if weighing how much to say. "I did not know," he admitted. "But I knew what I saw." She tilted her head slightly, curious. "And what did you see?" she asked. He held her gaze for a moment, his voice calm but direct. "Someone who refused to let someone else define her," he said. The words landed differently than the comments she had read, more personal, more immediate, as if they were not about the moment, but about her. Sophia felt a quiet shift inside her again, something steady, something that did not rely on the approval of a crowd or the validation of strangers online. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. That is not how I felt, she admitted. I felt exposed. Ethan nodded once. You were, he said, but you were also honest. And people recognized that. The simplicity of it made it harder to argue with. Sophia exhaled slowly, letting that truth settle in its own time. Outside, a faint drizzle had started, small drops tapping softly against the window, blurring the lights of the street just enough to make everything look softer, less defined. She watched it for a moment, then turned back to him. So what now? She asked again, but this time the question sounded different, less uncertain, more open. Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small, simple business card on the table between them, sliding it toward her without emphasis. There was no logo that stood out at first glance, no bold design, just clean lettering, understated, almost minimal. Sophia glanced at it, then picked it up, her eyes scanning the name printed on it. And in that instant, something changed. Her expression shifted, her brows drawing together slightly as recognition began to form, not from personal experience, but from headlines, from names she had seen in passing, names that carried weight whether she followed them closely or not. She looked up at him again, searching his face as if to confirm what she was beginning to understand. Ethan Cole, she repeated slowly, her voice quieter now, almost cautious. He did not look away. He did not rush to explain. He simply met her gaze with the same calm steadiness he had carried all night. Yes, he said. There was no dramatic reveal, no change in tone, just the truth placed between them as plainly as the card in her hand. Sophia looked down at it again, then back at him, her thoughts catching up all at once. You are that Ethan Cole, she said, the weight of the realization settling in. He gave a small nod. I am, he replied. And for a moment, the quiet cafe, the soft rain, the calm conversation, everything shifted just slightly, not breaking, but expanding, as Sophia realized that the man who had stepped forward when no one else did was not just a stranger who chose kindness, but someone who had never needed to prove anything to anyone in the first place. The name lingered in the space between them, heavier now than anything that had been said before, not because it changed who he was in that moment, but because it revealed everything he had chosen not to lead with. Sophia held the card a little tighter, her fingers brushing over the clean lettering as if it might confirm what her mind was still catching up to. You could have said something earlier, she said finally, her voice calm, but layered with something more complex than surprise. Ethan did not look defensive. He did not rush to justify himself. I could have, he agreed, but it would have changed the way you saw me. Sophia let out a small breath, glancing down at the table, then back at him. It already has, she admitted. There was no accusation in her tone, just honesty. Ethan nodded slightly, accepting that without resistance. Then let me be clear about something, he said, leaning forward just enough for his words to feel grounded, intentional. What I did tonight had nothing to do with who I am on that card. Sophia studied him carefully, searching for any sign of performance, any trace that this was part of something calculated, but there was none. Just the same quiet steadiness that had been there from the beginning. Then why me? She asked, the question softer now, but more direct than before. Ethan paused for a moment, not because he did not have an answer, but because he chose to say it right. Because you told the truth when it would have been easier not to, he said. And because you deserved someone to stand beside you when no one else did. The simplicity of it disarmed her again, but this time it did not leave her uncertain. It made something settle into place. Sophia looked down at the card once more, then slowly placed it back on the table, not pushing it away, but not holding on to it either. I do not know what to do with this, she admitted. Ethan followed her gaze briefly, then looked back at her. You do not have to do anything with it tonight, he said. It is just information, not an obligation. That distinction mattered more than he probably realized. Sophia leaned back slightly in her chair, letting that thought sink in, letting the weight of the night redistribute into something she could actually carry. Outside, the rain had grown steadier, the soft tapping against the window now more rhythmic, almost calming. as if the world itself had slowed down to match the pace of the moment. She glanced toward the window, then back at him, her expression clearer now than it had been all evening. "Everything I thought I had is gone," she said. "But for the first time, I do not feel like I lost myself with it." Ethan gave a small nod, as if that realization was the only thing that truly mattered. "Then you did not lose," he said. Sophia held his gaze for a moment longer, then a faint smile touched her lips, not bright, not overwhelming, but real. "You know," she said quietly, "you stepped into my worst moment like it was nothing." Ethan shook his head slightly. "It was not nothing," he replied. "It was just necessary." The word lingered, simple but exact. Sophia glanced down at her shoe again, the small repaired line still holding, still intact despite everything she had walked through that night. And for the first time, she smiled a little more. "I think I understand that now," she said.